Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. This week we're going to talk about brand fees. Now, many of you may wonder what that is because nobody even looks at the fine print. In fact, it began with a footnote, a line item in the accounts of Hindustan Zinc Limited, a listed subsidiary of Vedanta Limited, revealed payments of nearly 1,060 crore in the first quarter of FY 25-26 for so-called brand fee. At first glance, investors missed it. The bigger problem wasn't the payment itself, but the absence of proper disclosure or shareholder approval. According to US based short seller Viceroy Research, this payment, routed further to Vedanta Resources Limited, the debt laden parent of Vedanta, was made without obtaining mandatory shareholder approval as required by law. By, remember, avoiding disclosure rules. Vedanta, it turns out, has been extracting fees, brand fees, as high as 3% of turnover through ad hoc sub-licensing agreements. And astonishingly, this brand that is being paid for the trademark is never even used by Hindustan Zinc, which is a well-known company. And it is managed from an empty London office. All this was revealed by Viceroy. Viceroy has also alleged that in FY 22-23 and FY 24-25, Hindustan Zinc funneled 1,562 crore or nearly $183 million in brand fees to Vedanta, which then routed the money upstream to Vedanta Resources, the unlisted parent, and these fees also became collateral for high interest loans of Vedanta Resources, London. This is not just a fee, it's a mechanism to upstream cash in a Ponzi like structure, says the Viceroy report, quite correctly. Worse, it turned out that no board approvals were sought, although the government of India continues to hold a 29.5% stake in this former PSU. And the shareholder agreement requires board consent for loans above 20 crores or any related party deals. Of course, they're all jumping around now, but after it has come into the public domain. Meanwhile, investor and shareholder activist Girish Mittal has filed a public interest litigation. Moneylife has written about it. He has sought to halt payments until proper resolutions are passed. He wants a clawback of payments already made, and he wants an independent audit. Let's see what happens to the PIL. It points to breach of disclosure rules and calls the fees unjustifiable and harmful to investors. The revelations have led to an enforcement directorate probe, prompting Vedanta to hastily refund 1,030 crore, just about one fourth of the money. But what about the fact that the money shouldn't have gone in the first place, or that it should have been used for dividend payments or debt reduction, and which would have benefited minority investors? Instead, was being routed to an unlisted payment of Vedanta Resources for a brand that was not even used. We have not seen any action from any regulators on that front. Now let's look at the brand fee issue in general. It's been a mushrooming problem. While Vedanta's case is certainly egregious because of the lack of disclosures and the fact that it went to promoter entities, this is a common issue. Brand fees and royalty payments to promoter entities and foreign payment companies have mushroomed in corporate India over the last 3 decades. The fees are justified as covering trademarks, logos, and reputation. Sometimes they include licensing of technology, but in practice, by and large, the payments remain opaque. They're frequently inflated, they increase without reason, and have been extracted even when the companies are bleeding losses. From Tata Sons to Mahindra's, JSW Steel, Godrej, Nestle, Suzuki, Sony India, Colgate, all have had large sums flowing out of listed Indian entities every year in the name of brand value and brand fee. In 2018, the Uday Kota Committee on Corporate Governance tried to look into this issue, and it recommended that royalties and related party payments exceeding 5% of annual consolidated turnover should be approved by minority shareholders. The goal was to introduce a mechanism where there is shareholder oversight in such transactions, ensuring that companies pay a fair value for brand and royalty services. On royalty payments by 233 listed companies, the findings were quite shocking. It showed that in just this 1 year, FY 23-24, 10,800 crore was paid as brand fees and royalties. In a quarter of these companies, the payment exceeded 20% of profits. So, what is left for dividends? Even worse, 63 out of these 233 companies, remember a lot more are listed. Out of just 233, 63 companies shelled out royalties to the tune of 1,355 crore while making losses. So Vedanta is by no means the only controversial company. There are several controversies over the issue of brand fees and royalties. Remember the investigation into Kingfisher Airlines, controlled by Vijay Mallya, who's in London now? It revealed that Kingfisher, the brand, had an astonishing valuation of 3,406 crore, and banks, primarily IDBI Bank, had accepted this as collateral without any independent verification into how it would encash this brand if the company began to default, and it did begin to default. Now, it then turned out that Grant Thornton, the accounting firm, had done the valuation, but explicitly stated that it was only for internal accounting. But in 1998, the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal disallowed a payment of commission by Punjab Breweries, which was one of his liquor companies, to his ex wife Samira Malya on the claim, this is a claim that they had made, that her presence in social circles helps the company's business. The appellate tribunal refused to accept it. It said there wasn't sufficient evidence of any genuine service offered by her to the company or the brand, and threw it out. Another travesty, which was halted by proxy advisors and other shareholder activists, was Jubilant Foodworks. Now, I'm sure you wonder what is Jubilant Foodworks, but you have no such questions when you hear of Domino's Pizza or Dunkin' Donuts, right? So, Jubilant Foodworks sells pizzas under Domino's and donuts under Dunkin' Donuts, both international brand names for which it pays royalties abroad. But it tried to extract 0.25% of revenues to a promoter entity in 2019 for the brand name Jubilant, which nobody has even heard of nor is it used. Fortunately, when proxy advisors kicked up a fuss, this was dropped. Not everything is dropped. Take the JSW case. In 2014, 5 years earlier, it decided to pay a similar amount, 0.25% of turnover, or roughly 125 crore a year, to JSW Investments Private Limited. This company is 99.9% owned by Sangeeta Jindal, the wife of the promoter Sajjan Jindal. Proxy advisors again objected. In fact, Institutional Investor Advisory Services said it creates conflicts of interest and dilutes minority shareholder value. But it made no difference. The royalty is being paid since 2014 for the last 10 years or more. Tax authorities are having more success in questioning royalty payments because they're looking into GST, they're looking into transfer pricing. So, one big success happened in August 2025 when again ITAT, the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, slashed royalty payments being made by Sony India Private Limited as being excessive relative to service rendered by the parent in a transfer pricing case. Similar things have happened with Mahindra's. Now, this case in Sony India is set to become a benchmark for royalty payments by multinationals because more such cases are attracting tax scrutiny. That is for multinationals when there's transfer payments involved. But remember, despite these controversies, brand fees and royalties have grown and grown over the last 30 years. And for those of you who don't know, it began in the 90s when Ratan Tata took charge of the entire Tata Group, and he said all group companies would pay Tata Sons for the use of the Tata name, and this money would help fund philanthropy. We actually objected even at that time. I was still reporting, but many people thought it's wonderful because Tata is a blue chip name. But everybody else followed in the past. There's no philanthropy involved until we come to SEBI study. In fact, SEBI study, which is the first real study on what has happened, noted that there was very little independent assessment of whether brand fees deliver real value at all. Now, controversies over brand fees and royalties are not very Indian. It's a global phenomenon. There have been lots of litigation, anger. Tax authorities worldwide have seen royalties as a vehicle for what they call base erosion and profit shifting. And yet, brand licensing market was estimated at 369 billion in 2025 and is projected to keep growing definitely until 2033. There's a good rationale for this. The original rationale for brand royalty fees was quite sound. It was that companies gain from group reputation, the Tatas for instance. They can share intellectual property or parent company knowledge. But in practice, it has often degenerated into a shadow channel for promoters to siphon off cash at the expense of minority shareholders. For instance, JSW Steel. Why is the brand owned by an investment company owned by the promoters and not by the company itself? Nobody knows, because brand value was built in these listed companies. In 2025, SEBI ordered that audit committees should scrutinize material related party transactions. It also asked for disaggregated disclosure of payments exceeding 1,000 crores. But Vedanta shows that despite these disclosure rules, companies may not necessarily follow them. And remember, Vedanta may not be the only one. So clearly, it is not a deterrent. When promoters control boards and dominate shareholder votes, they manage to get approvals, which then become just a rubber stamp. Proxy advisors and shareholder activists have repeatedly flagged the abuse of brand and royalty payments without much impact. But tax authorities, as I said earlier, have proved more effective, creating interesting precedents in Sony India. This raises an awkward question. Will it fall to the taxman rather than the market regulator to keep brand royalties in check? Something for SEBI to think about. Because it certainly seems to be the case, unless SEBI tightens regulations further to do the following: disallow blanket approval of fees over the years, they keep increasing, mandate independent valuation with proper justification. So, if there's an increase, it has to be justified. If there are no profits, there has to be a justification if they're still paid. There has to be an enforceable clawback clause when it's unnecessarily paid, and there has to be have to be clear penalties for flouting the rules. If SEBI doesn't do this, the taxman will become more important, and then that won't apply to all companies, mainly multinationals. We have another hope that the PIL in the Vedanta case will make a difference. It's gone straight to the Supreme Court, but it may drag through the courts while enforcement agencies circle. So the larger debate on brand fees is unlikely to abate anytime soon. In principle, brand royalty should represent a fair payment for genuine value delivered. We're not saying don't pay. It cannot become a shadow channel for promoter enrichment. Remember, promoters have a large stake, they get dividend, they earn huge salaries these days. They're paying themselves crores and crores. And then they want to have a third channel of extracting money in the form of brand royalties and some others. It's not fair. In fact, only real transparency and competitive justification can ensure that India's listed companies serve all shareholders equitably. If you agree that promoters are getting their dividends, are getting their salaries, and they need to justify the brand and how it has added value, then do share this, make a noise so that SEBI tightens its rules. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.